Today I will tell you my story, a story not only about a football, but also about perseverance, passion, and how I faced prejudice. Have you ever felt judged just because you do what you love? Have you ever been discouraged by people who don't understand you just because they think what you are doing is inappropriate? I have experienced that because of a football. But instead of arguing, I chose to let my actions speak for themselves. I used my own skills and passion to prove that football is not about chaos, but about art, about hard work, about dedication. This is not just my story, but it could be the story of any of us who refuse to let others define our limits. Listen to this story, and if you have experienced the same thing, please share. Let our passion shine, even if someone tries to extinguish it. Don't forget to like, share, or follow to not miss any interesting stories. Los Angeles on a hot summer afternoon, the golden sunlight covers every street, reflects on the high-rise glass windows, and stretches out on the palm-lined sidewalks. I have just finished a stressful practice session with the youth team and am enjoying some relaxing time in front of my house. The breeze carried the scent of warm asphalt mixed with the scent of grass and trees after a long day in the sun. The surroundings were quiet, with only a few cars passing by on the road ahead, their headlights reflecting off the buildings across the street. The neighborhood was located in a rather peaceful corner of Los Angeles, where everything seemed perfectly neat and orderly. But because of that, I always felt a certain tightness, an atmosphere where anything outside the perfection of this residential area could be considered abnormal. I'm used to playing football here. Whether it's training or just a habit of keeping the ball in my hand, I try not to bother anyone. I don't kick the ball hard, I don't shout or make noise, I just enjoy the feel of the ball at my feet. For me, it's a way to stay connected to the game I love, even when I'm not on the training ground. But in this neighborhood, it seems like not everyone thinks that way. The ball continued to bounce rhythmically. I performed some advanced techniques to control it better, a pull with the sole of my foot, then a precise juggling with my knee. The ball floated in the air before gently landing on the instep of my foot. A sense of satisfaction rose as every movement was smooth, without missing a beat. It was the result of years of hard work on the field. Football was my life, all I pursued. Everything would have continued smoothly if it weren't for the unpleasant HMM sound from the other side of the road. Immediately, I knew my peaceful time was over. A high-pitched voice rang out from the familiar white picket fence, a sound I recognized at a glance. I let out a soft sigh, still watching the ball. I glanced to the side unwillingly, and sure enough, Karen was standing there, arms crossed, her eyes scrutinizing me as if I had just committed a serious crime. Her short, neatly curled blonde hair did nothing to hide the scowl on her face, which was always displeased with nothing. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, her eyes moving from me to the ball, then back to me with the expression of a judge about to pronounce sentence. I continued to juggle the ball, deliberately ignoring her, hoping she would just look and say nothing. But clearly I was being too optimistic. "You know," she said, drawing out each word as if trying to emphasize an important truth, "that thing is ruining the urban landscape." I paused, then quickly controlled the ball. Urban ugliness? A soccer ball? I looked down at the clean white and blue Adidas ball at my feet, then looked around. No trash, no graffiti, just a quiet neighborhood. But in Karen's eyes, me and this ball were enough of a problem to destroy the perfection she tried to protect. She took a step forward, pointing at the ball as if it were a terrifying foreign object. "I don't understand why you think you can play soccer on such an elegant street. This isn't a public park or a playground. Don't you see? Everything here is kept clean and orderly. There's no room for such chaos." I didn't respond, just continued to lift the ball with my knee and let it fall back to my feet. I had thought it would be best to let her finish and then retreat, but today it seemed she had no intention of letting it go so easily. She folded her arms and shrugged her shoulders in exasperation. "Every time I see you with that ball, I feel like this neighborhood is being degraded. We can't let this kind of unsophisticated behavior ruin such a classy place. If everyone started kicking a ball on the sidewalk, it would be a messy stadium in no time." I almost laughed at her reasoning. A messy stadium? I was just a person playing ball on a spacious sidewalk, not making any noise or bothering anyone. But to Mrs. Karen, everything had to be according to a certain standard that only she understood. But what bothered me most wasn't the complaints, but the look in her eyes. Not just annoyed, but also a little contemptuous. As if this ball and I didn't belong in this neighborhood. As if my existence here was a mistake. I took a deep breath, telling myself that this was just one of many small troubles I'd encountered. But this time her tone told me it wasn't over, and sure enough, a few seconds later she pulled out her phone. I raised my eyebrows in curiosity, but when I saw her dial 911, I knew she was serious. "Hello, police? I want to report a serious violation. There's a person kicking a ball on the sidewalk in this upscale neighborhood." I laughed. I'd heard stories of people calling 911 because their coffee was delivered wrong or their neighbor mowed their lawn too early. But calling the police over a ball? Karen stood there, the phone clenched in her hand after she hung up in frustration. Her expression was a mixture of anger, disappointment, and confusion. Perhaps she had imagined that the police would immediately arrive, asking me to stop my vandalism, but all she got in return was a polite refusal from the operator. However, I knew that Karen was a person who would not accept defeat easily. If the police did not do anything, she would find another way. Standing still for a few seconds, as if contemplating her next move, she suddenly threw me a sharp look. I continued to juggle the ball, deliberately keeping my face calm as if completely unaffected by her presence. But I knew she was waiting for a reaction. A sign of remorse, an excuse, or even just a frown would be enough for her to have a reason to push this story further. But I did not give her that chance. I just played ball quietly, letting the silence between us stretch a little longer. Finally, she spoke, this time not so harshly, but with a tone of sardonic annoyance. "Fine," she said, folding her arms over her chest. "If the police don't care about keeping the neighborhood clean, I'll take care of it myself." I didn't reply, just twirled the ball lightly on the instep of my foot. I was used to this kind of threat, the neighborhood council, the complaint. I knew she wouldn't let it go, but at the same time, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. If she could turn the entire neighborhood against me over a soccer ball, I probably wouldn't have lived here this long. She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for something to happen. But when she saw that I continued to play soccer without any sign of stopping or reacting the way she wanted, she took a deep breath, turned around, and walked into the house. The door slammed shut behind Karen, a cold statement that this wasn't over. I took a deep breath, lifted the ball with my knee, and executed a perfect around the world. The afternoon breeze cooled. The neighborhood quieted again, but I knew the peace was temporary. Karen might have retreated, but she was definitely still planning her next move. I stood still, the ball rolling gently at my feet as she clutched the phone to her ear. I couldn't hear the conversation, but her expression said it all. Surprise flashed before turning to annoyance. The operator clearly wasn't reacting the way she wanted. She must have imagined a different scenario, a stern voice agreeing that kicking a soccer ball on the sidewalk was a serious matter, a quick call to the police, and soon a patrol car would show up. The police would get out, take a report, and order me to stop. But that wasn't the case. I could see her shoulders stiffen as the operator answered. At first she seemed to be trying to keep her cool, trying to explain things in a way that made the situation seem more urgent than it actually was. But then, from the shifting expressions on her face, I could tell the operator wasn't getting the point she was trying to make. I kept tossing the ball, keeping a steady rhythm, and waited to see where this would go. Karen frowned briefly, then spoke in a clear, harsh tone, as if the person on the other end of the line didn't understand English. Although I couldn't hear exactly what she said, I could make out the words she was saying from the fragments of unacceptable, upscale neighborhood, unsightly urban area. I imagined the operator, perhaps an officer used to dealing with real emergencies like traffic accidents, fires, and domestic violence, now flustered by a call about a soccer ball on the sidewalk. I could almost hear their voice, polite but patient, trying to explain that kicking a soccer ball wasn't a crime. They might have asked her if I was a danger to anyone, if I was damaging public property, if I was a threat to the safety of the neighborhood, and when all the answers were no, they must have begun to wonder why she was calling the emergency line over something so trivial. The irritation on Karen's face was becoming more evident. She took a deep breath, seemingly trying to convince the person on the other end that kicking a soccer ball on the sidewalk was a bigger problem than they thought. I could imagine her explaining that this was more than just a soccer ball, but a sign of neighborhood decay, a disturbance that, if not dealt with, would lead to a whole series of other unorganized acts. But no matter what she said, the operator was not convinced. She tilted her head slightly, pursed her lips, and her eyes flashed with disappointment, then a quick blink as if she had heard something unacceptable. I guess the operator had probably said something like, "Ma'am, we can't send the police for someone playing soccer on the sidewalk." I lifted the ball gently, moving to a slow knee-to-knee juggle, keeping my expression completely calm. I knew it wasn't over, but at least now Karen was starting to realize that the police weren't just coming for a soccer ball. The silence stretched on, broken only by the wind rustling through the trees along the road. She gritted her teeth, her face strained as she tried to keep her composure, but I knew she wouldn't give up easily, and I was ready to see what would happen next. Karen stood motionless, the phone pressed to her ear, her hand clenched until her knuckles were white, her face tensed, the lines on her forehead deepening as she listened to the operator repeat the answer she didn't want. Her lips pressed together, and for a moment her eyes flashed with shock, as if she couldn't believe her request had been denied. But the shock was fleeting, and then it quickly turned to pure anger. She shook her head, almost letting out a silent laugh, and gripped the phone tighter. I didn't have to listen to hear her make one last effort to calm herself, to try to convince the operator in some way that made sense. Maybe she was emphasizing that this was an upscale, elite neighborhood that wouldn't tolerate this kind of uncivilized behavior. Maybe she was trying to turn a ball into a symbol of chaos and loss of control, the first sign of decline in a place she believed had to be perfect. But no matter what she said, I knew the operator wouldn't budge. I could tell from her demeanor that she was still maintaining her polite but firm tone, that there was no law against kicking a soccer ball on the sidewalk, that the police had more important things to deal with, that she couldn't abuse the emergency line for such a trivial matter. The operator's final reply seemed to be the last straw. I saw her lips tremble, her eyes blaze as she abruptly pulled the phone away from her ear, but she didn't hang up immediately. I thought she would give up, turn around and walk into the house in frustration, but she didn't. She couldn't just accept defeat like that. And then she practically screamed into the phone, "This is irresponsible. Is this how the government treats its taxpayers? Don't you care about maintaining the standards of this neighborhood?" I looked at her, my eyes still calm, but I couldn't help but be surprised. I had expected her to be angry, but I didn't think her anger would be this dramatic. She wasn't just angry at me anymore. Now she was angry at the system, angry at the people who weren't on her side, angry that she couldn't control the situation the way she wanted. I imagined the operator on the other end of the line. Maybe they were used to these ridiculous calls. Maybe they were flipping through their manuals, looking for a quick way to end the call. But either way, I knew Karen was losing control, and that was something she never wanted. And then she slammed down the phone. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet of the neighborhood. I saw her take a deep breath, as if trying to regain the composure she had just lost. Her hand was still gripping the phone, but her eyes were dark. I could feel her anger not only because the operator had rejected her, but because I was still standing there with the ball at my feet, completely unaffected by this incident. No one was on her side. The police did not come. The neighborhood was still quiet, except that she had been rejected, and that was something she could not accept. I continued to juggle the ball, my eyes still following her, not to provoke her, but to wait for her next move. I knew she was not the type to give up easily, and this little war was not really over. Karen stood there, heavily breathing, her hand gripping the phone as if she might crush it in frustration. Even though she had hung up in frustration, she had not yet accepted defeat. The neighborhood was peaceful, no police cars, no sirens, no one appeared to order me to stop. I was still there, the ball at my feet motionless, as if the call had never meant anything. I could see she was waiting for a response. Maybe she thought I would feel guilty enough to stop, or at least confused by her outburst. But I had no intention of doing so. Instead of saying something to diffuse the situation or explain, I decided to show it my way. I took a deep breath, then gently let the ball slide off the instep of my foot, bouncing in the air. With a light tap of my knee, I held the ball perfectly in mid-air, not letting it drop even a fraction. Then I lifted the ball with my thigh, doing a juggle over my shoulder, letting it land gently on the back of my neck with perfect precision. The ball felt smooth, precise, as if it were part of my body. Karen blinked, her lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I knew she had never seen anyone play a ball like this, at least not on the sidewalks of her neighborhood, which she considered the epitome of neatness and order. To her, a ball was merely an annoying object, a rolling object that bounced off surfaces and left a dirty mark. But to me, it was an extension of myself, something I had absolute control over, no matter the circumstances. I kept moving, deftly twisting so that the ball slid lightly over my back, then flicking it back into the air with my heel. When it dropped, I caught it with the ball of my foot, balancing it on the ball of my foot for a long moment before gently pushing it up with a soft touch. The ball never lost control, never bounced haphazardly on the pavement as she had feared, but always within reach, always following my movements smoothly and artfully. She said nothing, just stood there, her eyes filled with surprise and confusion. She had probably never seen a real game, never seen the techniques I performed every day in training. To her, soccer was probably just a noisy game played by rough children on the streets, a disturbance that needed to be eliminated from this elegant neighborhood. But now I could see a flicker of emotion in her eyes. I said nothing. I didn't need to say anything. I just kept performing, letting my every move answer all her previous complaints. The ball continued to bounce steadily, rhythmically like a slow song, each touch intentional without the slightest hint of loss of control. I spun around the world, circling the suspended ball before flicking it up with the outside of my foot, letting it spin in the air in a perfect circle. My body moved rhythmically with the ball as if we were two entities fused together. There was no forced movement, no sign of the urban blight she had accused me of. Karen didn't take her eyes off me, and in that moment I knew she wasn't seeing a normal soccer ball anymore. She was seeing something else, something that couldn't be dismissed or complained about as easily as before. In her eyes, for the first time, there was no anger or blame, just stunned silence. No more shouting, no more anger, just her standing there, witnessing something beyond her control. Her eyes were filled with disbelief and confusion. I could feel the conflict within me, half of me still wanting to believe that I was the disorderly person disrupting the neighborhood's perfection, but half of me fascinated by what had just happened. I was no longer just a troublemaker with a ball. I had just demonstrated that what she saw as chaos was actually an art, a skill that required absolute control, patience, and constant practice. I let the ball roll gently down the sole of my foot, holding it still for a moment before lifting it gently, catching it perfectly with my knee. I looked at her directly for the first time since this conversation began, and I could see her defenses falter. This was no longer a confrontation, but a moment where she was forced to reevaluate every preconceived notion she had of me from the start. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool afternoon breeze sweep through the neighborhood. Then, in a calm but firm voice, I spoke not to argue or justify, but simply to state the truth. I told her who I was. I was not some bum kicking a soccer ball on the sidewalk to cause trouble. I was not some aimless youth with no regard for urban aesthetics or neighborhood standards. I was Jake Carter, a young player on the U.S. national soccer team, recently called up to the U.S. soccer. I had trained for years, day by day, hour by hour, to reach this level, and everything I did, even the simplest touches on the sidewalk, was part of that constant training. I could see the change in her eyes. At first she squinted, as if trying to process what I had just said. Perhaps she had seen my name in the paper, or skimmed through some article about promising young players. Perhaps she had never thought that the man who lived next door to her was one of the names representing the country on the pitch. She blinked once, then again, as if trying to find a reason to deny it. But she couldn't. Not after what she had just witnessed. The atmosphere between us changed dramatically. If before she had looked at me with contempt and judgment, now it was replaced by suspicion mixed with amazement. I didn't know what she was thinking, maybe a little shame for judging me so quickly, or maybe anger at not being able to find a valid reason to continue criticizing me. I said nothing more because there was no need. The ball continued to dance at my feet, graceful and skillful, a stronger affirmation than any words. A gentle breeze blew by, washing away the tension between us. No more harshness, no more harsh words or threatening tones, just a strange silence. A silence that perhaps Karen had never experienced when confronting someone. And perhaps for the first time she realized that she was wrong. Karen stood there, but no longer had the tough or arrogant look like before, only a confused and hesitant look in her eyes. Every argument she had ever made, such as that soccer was unsightly, that this neighborhood was not for soccer players, collapsed in a matter of minutes. Not only had I demonstrated absolute control of the ball, but I had also proven that I was not a bum disturbing this neighborhood. I was a real athlete, representing something bigger than myself. She looked at me again, her eyes flicking to the ball still bouncing rhythmically on the top of my foot, and then she bit her lip, as if considering whether to continue to be stubborn. But then I saw her shoulders slump, a clear sign that she had realized that this fight was no longer meaningful. And then, without a word, she turned and walked straight into the house, closing the door with a neat click, almost a silent retreat. No apology, no justification. Finally, she just turned and walked straight into the house, slamming the door like a silent surrender. I continued playing. No rush, no fanfare, smooth, free, as if nothing had happened. I didn't need to stop to think about what had just happened because, in truth, it hadn't changed anything about me. I was Jake Carter. I was a soccer player, and I would play wherever and whenever I wanted. Karen might have been angry, might have called the police, might have tried to exert her power to control something she didn't understand, but in the end, all she had to do was accept the unchangeable truth that she couldn't stop something she couldn't control. The sun was setting, the neighborhood was bathed in orange, and me, I was still playing soccer. Nothing had changed, except for one thing. I knew that from now on, Mrs. Karen would never try to call the police over a soccer ball again. If you ever encounter criticism, judgmental looks, or unreasonable barriers just because of your passion for soccer, remember that you don't need to argue to prove yourself, but let your actions speak for themselves. Keep going, keep practicing, keep pursuing what you believe in. One day, those who doubted you will have nothing left to say, because your perseverance and talent will shine through on their own. If you have ever been in a similar situation, please share your story. Let the world know that passion has no limits, and no one has the right to stop you from pursuing your dreams. Don't forget to like, share, or follow. Sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch.